All right, let's dive right in. Today we're looking at something absolutely fascinating, based on a brilliant academic analysis. How has the teaching of the Bible in Israel's public schools changed over the last few decades? It's really a story about a pendulum, swinging between two completely different ideas of what it means to learn a foundational text. And honestly, it's a perfect case study for anyone who thinks about education, about curriculum, and about how a society tells its own story.
And this really gets to the heart of the matter, doesn't it? For any nation with a foundational text, this question is huge. Is the goal to instill faith, to teach critical history, or is it to foster some kind of cultural literacy? How you answer that question changes absolutely everything that happens in the classroom. So where does our story really kick off? We have to go back to the early 1990s, to a really pivotal moment. Israeli society was facing what some saw as a crisis, a decline in humanities education, and some pretty deep social divisions. And the response to that was the creation of something called the Shenhar Committee. So back in '91, the government steps in. They're seeing this decline in the study of Jewish culture and this growing gap between religious and secular Israelis. And in 1994, the committee drops its report. And listen, this wasn't just some minor update. It was a radical proposal for a totally new way forward, one that really embraced openness to the world. And this vision, wow, it was bold. I mean, just listen to that phrase, freed from dependence on the authority of halakha, that's traditional Jewish law. This was a call for a pluralistic, critical, open engagement with Jewish texts. It explicitly saw the student in a state school as secular, as someone looking for a diversity of views. This was a potential game changer.
That revolutionary vision? Well, it really hit its peak about a decade later. And that brings us to the 2003 National Curriculum, which is really the high watermark of this open, academic approach to teaching the Bible.
So, what did this actually look like in the classroom? Well, the curriculum fully embraced academic biblical criticism. That means it wasn't just about reading the text, it was about analyzing it like a historical document. Students were actually encouraged to compare the flood story in Genesis to the Epic of Gilgamesh, or to look at different versions of the text found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The whole goal was to understand the Bible as a product of its time. But here's the thing about pendulums, right? They don't stay in one place. After 2003, the approach began to shift, and pretty dramatically. All of that momentum toward an open, critical study of the Bible started to reverse, swinging right back towards a more traditional, more insular approach. Okay, so to really get what's happening here, we need to understand these two big competing ideas. First up is biblical criticism, the academic method that was so central to that 2003 curriculum. It basically treats the Bible like any other ancient text, using history, archaeology, and literary analysis to figure out where it came from. And then, on the other side, you have traditional interpretation. This approach reads the Bible through the lens of centuries of religious commentary, focusing on its moral and spiritual meanings. The tension between these two methods, well, that's the heart of our whole story. And you can see this shift in the tiniest details, but they have huge implications. Check out this change in wording. In 2003, the curricula said archaeology could help verify the Bible. Now, that implies it could also maybe challenge it, right? But by 2018, its role is just to illuminate it. This subtle change completely neuters the critical function of archaeology. It's no longer a tool for testing the text, just for illustrating it. And it's not just a hunch, right? The numbers back this up in a pretty dramatic way. Take a look at how many times these key academic terms even show up in the curricula. The Dead Sea Scrolls, a source of incredible textual insight, go from 10 mentions in 2003 down to 7 and then 0 by 2018. The Epic of Gilgamesh? Poof, gone. These aren't just words. They represent entire fields of critical thinking being quietly removed from the classroom. So what does this actually look like in a lesson plan? This big philosophical shift had very real, very concrete consequences for what students were actually being asked to do when they opened the book. You can literally watch the downgrade happen over time. In 2003, the goal was to understand different ways of reading, both critical and traditional. By 2012, they just had to know about them, a subtle but important downgrade. But get this, by 2018, the shift is complete. Traditional commentary is now the main tool. In academic analysis, it's been demoted to just explaining obscure places, which basically means just defining tricky words. Let's look at a really concrete example, the story of the Assyrian king Sennacherib's attack on Jerusalem. The Bible presents it as this miraculous victory for the kingdom of Judah. And the 2018 teaching materials tell students that external sources, like Assyrian records, actually verify and strengthen this biblical account. Sounds simple enough, right? But what happens when you actually look at those external sources from a critical perspective? Yeah, not so much. The Assyrian records tell a completely different story. Sennacherib's prism, which is an official Assyrian account, describes the campaign as a total victory for Assyria. It brags that King Hezekiah was locked up like a bird in a cage and that Judah was forced to pay this massive tribute. So, by presenting only the parts that verify the biblical story, the curriculum is hiding the full, much more complex historical picture from students. And this pattern just keeps popping up, especially when it comes to the Bible's relationship with other ancient cultures. The 2003 curriculum demanded a deep comparison with Mesopotamian epics. By 2018, those texts are gone from the core requirements, and a sample lesson plan suggests, and I'm not kidding, that teachers can just look up a summary on Wikipedia. The message is pretty clear. The Bible is to be studied in isolation.
Okay, so let's pull back. We've seen the pendulum swing. What are the broader implications here? Why does this shift in a school curriculum matter so much?
0.
That's the number of times the 2018 curriculum uses the word secular to describe its students. Remember the Shin-Har Committee? Its entire vision was built on recognizing the pluralistic, secular identity of students in state schools. By 2018, that recognition has completely evaporated from the official document.
The author of this study, Boaz Stavi, he sums it up perfectly. He says the end result of all these changes is that Bible education in secular state schools has become almost indistinguishable from how it's taught in the state's religious school system. That line has been almost completely erased.
So, what's the big takeaway here? This shift has real consequences. Students are getting a simplified, single-voiced version of the Bible, totally disconnected from its historical context and the rich diversity of interpretations that exist. It really marks a turn away from that humanistic vision of Jewish culture and a changing world, and towards something much more closed off. And that leaves us with the fundamental question that this whole analysis really poses. For educators, for parents, for citizens, what is the purpose of teaching a text like this? Is it to create a unified identity around a single clean story, or is it to equip students with the critical tools they need to navigate a complex world of diverse and often conflicting voices? The answer to that, well, that shapes a nation.